On December 7, 1941, a day that President Franklin D. Roosevelt described as a date which will live in infamy, the world witnessed one of the most devastating surprise attacks in modern history. Japanese forces attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, forever changing the course of World War II and pulling the United States into the conflict. To understand how this event came to pass, we need to go back a few years. During the 1930s, Japan was aggressively expanding its territory, occupying large areas of China and Southeast Asia. With an ambition for power and resources, Japan saw Western powers, particularly the United States, as obstacles to its goals of dominance in the Pacific. In response, the United States imposed economic sanctions to restrict Japan's access to critical resources like oil and steel. Without these supplies, Japan's war machine began to falter. Japan's leaders faced a difficult choice: negotiate with the United States or use force to secure the resources they needed. Ultimately, they chose the latter, betting everything on a surprise attack aimed at crippling the United States Pacific Fleet and securing supremacy in Asia. The mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of Japan's combined fleet. Although Yamamoto was well aware of the immense industrial and military strength of the United States, he also knew that if Japan didn't act quickly, it would be left isolated and without resources. Thus, he began planning an operation that had to be as swift as it was devastating. Yamamoto's primary goal was to destroy the U.S. fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor before it had a chance to respond. To accomplish this, Yamamoto devised a detailed plan that involved 2 waves of attacks, led by a force of more than 350 planes and 6 aircraft carriers. To avoid detection by the U.S., the Japanese fleet sailed in complete radio silence from the Kuril Islands, crossing the vast ocean to a position 230 miles north of Hawaii. On the morning of December 7, 1941, soldiers and sailors at Pearl Harbor began their Sunday as usual. It was a sunny, calm day, and no one expected what was about to happen. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles offshore, Japanese aircraft carriers began preparing their planes for the assault. Led by Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the planes took off from the carriers in 2 waves, the first at 7:55 a.m. and the second at 8:54 a.m. At 7:48 a.m., the first wave of Japanese planes appeared on radar at a control station on the island of Oahu. However, the radar operators, surprised by the magnitude of the signal, mistook it for a formation of American planes scheduled to arrive from California. This misidentification gave the Japanese attack the element of surprise needed to maximize its impact. At 7:55 a.m., the attack began. From above, Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes descended on Pearl Harbor Bay, firing and launching torpedoes at ships and military facilities. The flagship vessels of the U.S. fleet, including the USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, and USS West Virginia, were the first to be hit. The USS Arizona, one of the largest and most prestigious ships in the fleet, was struck by an 800-kilogram bomb that penetrated its deck and reached an ammunition magazine, causing a massive explosion that sank the ship and killed 1,177 sailors within minutes. Crews fought for their lives, trying to resist the attack and save their comrades as fire and smoke overtook the harbor. At 8:54 a.m., the second wave of Japanese planes arrived, focusing on airfields and destroying American aircraft still on the ground. The goal was to prevent any possibility of a counterattack by the U.S. Air Force and to consolidate Japanese air dominance in the Pacific. In less than 2 hours, the Japanese Air Force had achieved devastating success. Of the 8 battleships in Pearl Harbor, 4 were sunk and 4 were heavily damaged. In addition, nearly 200 American planes were destroyed, and over 2,400 U.S. soldiers and civilians lost their lives. The naval base, once thought to be a fortress in the Pacific, was reduced to rubble. However, the attack was not a complete success for Japan. Despite the severe damage, the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor that day, as they were out on training missions. These carriers, which Japan had failed to destroy, would prove crucial in the war that was about to begin. News of the attack on Pearl Harbor spread quickly throughout the United States. The nation, which had until then stayed out of the war, awakened with unanimous fury. The next day, December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his famous speech before Congress. declaring that December 7th would be remembered as a date which will live in infamy. I ask Congress to declare, since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, that a state of war exists between the United States and the Japanese Empire. That same day, the United States declared war on Japan, and within days, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States, dragging the country into a conflict that would change it forever. The American response was swift and determined. Thousands of citizens enlisted to serve in the military, and the economy mobilized to support the war effort. America's entry into World War II marked a turning point in the global conflict. With its vast industrial power and endless supply of troops, the United States became the arsenal of democracy. The war, which had until then seemed to favor the Axis powers, began to slowly shift toward the Allies. From that moment on, Pearl Harbor became a symbol of unity and resistance. Instead of demoralizing Americans, the attack strengthened their resolve to win. From that point forward, the Pacific War intensified, and battles like Midway and Guadalcanal tested the Americans' resilience in their fight to stop Japanese expansion. Today, Pearl Harbor remains a reminder of that fateful day. A national monument honors the memory of those who lost their lives. And each year, thousands of people visit this site to remember the sacrifice and bravery that inspired an entire nation. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed history, proving that in moments of greatest adversity, a nation can find the unity and strength needed to defend its freedom and ideals.